Welcome back to A Complete History of Manchester United. I'm Wayne Barton, author and producer of several Manchester United books and films, joined as always by the legendary football writer Paddy Barclay to take you on this journey through Old Trafford history. If you're watching the video live or back on the video replay, please give us a like and subscribe and join in the conversation in the comment section. If you're listening back on the audio podcast, please be sure to subscribe and give us a review on the platform you're listening on. Paddy, Manchester United finished second in 1980. Their ambition had to be going into this season to win the league. They tried to make some serious overtures in the transfer market. They went for Liam Brady only for him to accept the money that was on offer in Italy. And then even Dave Sexton before the season starts, he's saying, "Oh, we made great strides in the division last season." He was really talking up the fact that they finished second, so there was no way out of it. United would have to challenge for the title, and oh, good grief! The start to this season is anything but a title challenge.
Yes, absolutely. As you say, I mean, you were saying in the last episode that you never felt that the title challenge was anything other than arithmetical rather than real, and that Liverpool always had them at arm's length. And so obviously they were looking to get off to a flying start, and it didn't happen. I mean, the opening game in front of 54,500, the kind of crowd that a championship chasing side would expect. 3-0, Macari, Grimes and Thomas. That looked all right. What didn't? There was, back to earth with a bang, with losing at Wolves 1-0, then draws against Birmingham, Sunderland, Tottenham, and then a 5-0 win against Leicester, and then back to the draws. Admittedly, one in a derby, but yes, there was just too many draws, and United found themselves off the pace. And so much for the title challenge.
It is funny because when we were talking just before we came on air, I had my notes that it was arguably the poorest start since United were relegated, and you said, "Well, it's not that bad because they only lose
14."
And then you look at it, they only win 5 in the first 19, which sort of tells its own story as well.
Yeah, it does.
Early eliminations in all the cups, desperate times calling for desperate measures. But, I mean, that's the way that the Gary BIRTLES signing is put into context. He signed for £1.25 million from Nottingham Forest. The quote from Dave Sexton upon his signing is, "He's a goer, he's a trier."
Yeah.
And he certainly was that.
He was. He had been at Nottingham Forest, but of course he'd had, the proverbial rocket up his backside there, hadn't he? As being part of that Clough generation. For whatever reason, that motivation wasn't there at Old Trafford. Now, in a first season, some players take to it. So, I mean, look at, to take the opposite end of the spectrum from Gary BIRTLES, look at Zlatan. He swaggered into Manchester United as if he owned the place. Similarly, Cristiano in his second incarnation. Gary BIRTLES didn't have that kind of pedigree behind him. And looking back on it, I don't know if he's ever confronted this, but that he just, it was just too much for him. And that the pressure that comes with playing for Manchester United just kind of overwhelmed him. That and the underwhelming style of play under Dave.
Yeah, he said that they didn't have the pedigree, but I mean,
and
it's the context and the way in which you present the numbers, because this is a double-time European Cup winner, which makes his pedigree arguably greater than anyone who's played for United.
Yes.
Strange way, but yeah, he's even when he arrived, he's not a great goal scorer. He's not renowned as a great goal scorer. He's one of those. I don't want to be disrespectful to Gary Birtles. Neither do I want to be disrespectful to Stuart Pearson. But he was in that kind of mold of player, and it makes you wonder why. Well, why Pearson had to go, but why he wasn't in favour in the first place under.
Yes. Yep. That's right. I just think it was a question of pedigree, and I think that was his word. Yeah, you've just used it. Yeah. I think he knew that the way he fitted into that Nottingham Forest team, just it wasn't going to happen under the Sexton regime at Old Trafford. You wonder if it might have been different if he'd come in under Doherty or later Atkinson. That someone who encouraged his sort of coltish skills at the front, would have got the best out of him. But certainly it didn't happen there.
Well, we'll look at the numbers later, and what you've just said there is a nice little hint towards something that we can talk about when we bring up the squad statistics.
Yeah.
What you have when you have a run of draws, and we've talked about this in earlier. I think Frank O'Farrell had a similar run of draws. It's kind of like you're looking at that team. What is their composition? What's their makeup? Are they going to lurch from this run of draws and put some wins together? Is it going to look like good momentum, or is it going to look like bad momentum? The truth is, even his best or worst with Sexton, the difference was so minimal, it's so marginal.
Yeah.
The run of defeats that United go on over the winter period, it's something like 7 defeats in 11 games, just 2 wins. Most of them are by the odd goal. They're never battered by anyone. And then later on, when we come to the recovery, which will be some point away in this podcast, but again, the wins are by the odd goal. A lot of criticism over the style in the mid-season. Even Pat Crerand, who we've once joked about saying United could lose. Well, they did. There's one time that it was an old journalist that said that they'd reported on United losing 7-2 and they'd been involved in a 9-goal thriller. Well,
that's true. That's true. When David, I think it was either at Newcastle or Sheffield Wednesday, and they lost 7-2. I promise you this is true. The old editor of the Manchester Evening News came down to look at the pink, and it said something about United ship 7 in, horror show or something like that. And he changed it to United in 9-goal thriller. And he was a complete red. Tom Henry, I think his name was. He was a great editor anyway of the Manchester Evening News.
Well, Paddy Crerand is certainly along those lines. You would imagine
Paddy would no doubt have repeated it and claimed it for himself.
But even he cannot be, and we know he looks at the Doherty reign through mixed vision for sure. Like he was happy. He's gone on record as saying he thought he was a good manager for United, but he didn't like him very much. But even Paddy Crerand criticised the style of United in the early 1981 period. He said teams that came here to defend used to get 5 past them, and Sexton comes out not really swinging in the pugilist style in which he would have loved to have been.
Yeah. Well, his dad was a boxer. Dad was a boxer, Archie Sexton.
But his fighting spirit is not really great because he just insists that his team aren't defensive when the argument for it is not very strong. Against it is not very strong. United lose 3 games on the bounce 1-0, and then they draw 2 games in a row. One of those is a 3-3 draw at Villa Park, which is 2 3-3 draws with Villa over the season. This one at Villa Park is notable because the TV footage of the game shows Tommy Kavanagh and Dave Sexton sat on opposite ends of the substitutes bench. And I know that is something that Sammy McElroy has talked to me about before because he's watched, he obviously is Mr. Manchester United. He's watched loads of games back and he's always talks about that game, that it's always struck him, that he looked, because he wouldn't have noticed that at the time that there was something, a riff like that going on. Obviously, United, with this run of 7 defeats in 11 games, it's put Dave Sexton on the brink. This time around, obviously United are really in some kind of mad regression. And we've talked about before the sort of winter periods looking like Sexton might have his job on the line. This time it felt a little bit more terminal, didn't it, Paddy?
Yes, it did. It was, I think, the northern edition of the Daily Express. In those days, the newspapers were much more heavily editionized, and so the northern editions of the papers, the Manchester prints, would, almost like local papers for United, and to a degree when they were United's equal city as well. And there was a great headline, and it was "Cold Trafford," and that proved prophetic.
Yeah. There was the indication, or at least a suggestion, that Dave Sexton was spared being sacked because of the fact that there was an emergency meeting of club chairman in February after a few dismissals.
Yeah.
So there was a sort of a common agreement that no one else would get sacked until the end of the season.
Yep.
It's funny when you look back at it, when you consider the common day sacking sprees that you see in the Premier League.
Yeah.
I went back to look at the figures. How many people were sacked this season? How rife could it have been? And really, I mean, if you look at it on the numbers, it's only one manager had been sacked before February. One on 1st of February, Malcolm Allison. A couple of changed, Leeds changed manager, Crystal Palace, Manchester City, Norwich City. And then it was the second one from Palace, I think, that really sort of upset the apple cart with it. The agreement effectively, although Martin Edwards says that this didn't affect his decision, he said that he couldn't remember the actual conference between the chairman. It didn't affect his decision. He'd already made his mind up on what he was going to do by the end of the season. No spoilers. But Sunderland apparently didn't take heed of the warning because they sacked Ken Knighton on 1st of April, which wouldn't have been very funny for him.
No.
But although Dave Sexton does think that he's got something of a reprieve, because United win 2-1 against Ipswich on 21st of March.
Yeah.
He says after the game, I think we might have turned a corner. I'm more than happy. I'm delirious, he says.
Yeah.
I would have liked to have seen his face when he said those words.
He was right, though, because they were on a winning run. Before then, they'd lost 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 5, and 5 out of 7, and 6 out of 9. So, I mean, it had been disastrous run. I mean, Ken Knighton must have thought, bloody hell, what's Dave Sexton got that I haven't?
Yeah, well, a little bit of delirium, as it seemed, because United.
He was right about the corner turning, because United then went on a run of 7 wins at the end of the season. I am spoiling your narrative. Sorry.
No, you're not. They win at Everton. They win at Liverpool as well. So a couple of great results in there as well. There's also the story that Joe Jordan is. Well, I guess this isn't a good part of it, but Joe Jordan has sort of emerged as a really strong figure in this United attack, somewhat funnily. He's the top scorer, albeit in a low-scoring side. Gary Birtles, incidentally, has not done well at all. He's really struggled. Doesn't score a single goal through the season. Everything's sort of directed to the totemic Jordan, and United are playing off him. It's gone quite well. He's not prolific, but he's the sort of, because he's that totemic figure, he's such a vivid and striking figure in the United attack. And because United are still one of the most high-profile teams, Jordan's success has seen him coveted by Italian sides. And in these days, as I mentioned earlier in the podcast, Liam Brady had already been sort of earmarked for a move to Italy. The Italian clubs were fighting, throwing lira at him. There were a couple of clubs after him, and he would eventually play for a couple of clubs over there. Jordan.
More ominously, Jordan and Brady had the same solicitor.
Yeah, and he was doing the work for them. And obviously through Brady's move, obviously that solicitor knew the figures that would be on the table for Joe Jordan. So when United were confronted with his demands for a new contract, they were quite frightened by those demands, saying they wanted £1,000 a week for a new contract. That story got out to the Express. There's a great line from David Miller in the Express who said, "It was so grotesque and absurdity," which is, by the way, the best 6 words to open any sentence.
Yeah.
It was so grotesque and absurdity. I trust United will swiftly invite him to go and join the Dole queue or Stockport. He would eventually get his move to Italy. And he would.
Yes, but I mean, having you see, David Miller wasn't frightened of upsetting Joe Jordan.
Yeah.
But my God, I bet he got some stick from Stockport fans.
Yeah. Yeah. He didn't go to Stockport, that's for sure. He climbs.
Bangor's his chance of a Friday night at Edgeley Park, yeah.
Although I think they would have quite liked Joe Jordan at the time. So Jordan actually he scores 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 goals in his last 6 games. Fairly prolific for him for his own goal scoring record.
Yeah.
It's not enough to save Dave Sexton. I do want to pull another great journalist line out, Paddy, and I know that you might go a little bit bashful at this, but I absolutely loved it. So United, the last 2 games of the season, they play West Brom at home, win 2-1. They play Norwich at home, win 1-0. So you mentioned earlier they started the season with 54,000 at Old Trafford. They finished the season with just 40,000 there to watch Norwich. They win these games are by a single goal. They're not playing well. Your review of those last couple of games. Sexton's last instructions of the season had been that United should go out in style. This was a bit like asking an SAS unit to perform Swan Lake.
Christ, I wasn't too bad in those days, yeah. But no, I'm afraid, we were sort of running out of ways of describing it. It is extraordinary that I remember one of the jokes at the time was Dave's idea of adventure was to have an after 8 mint at 7:45. We'd kind of sort of it had become a bit of a sort of musical joke, and I mean for a team that's won at Anfield and won at Goodison and has been on a 6-game unbeaten run, to find just over 40,000 for the final home game, the one where you go to give them a lap of honor. Well, it told its own story, and I suppose, although Martin said he had made up his mind before, that would, had he been swithering, that would have made up his mind for him. I do, I'm sure that Martin Edwards did have that strategic view of things, because, his comments afterwards made it clear that here was not one of these instances where you could say, yeah, manager got sacked, but we all know it's a results game. Well, he got results, but it's at Old Trafford, it's a little bit more than that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, results weren't enough this season because they finished in 8th and those early cup eliminations as well. They also won at Forest, so 3 big away games.
Forest, of course, yeah.
So they've done really well in those games, but there are way too many draws. And he was duly dismissed in the week after the conclusion of the season, like I said, in which United finished 8th in the league. That brings us to the end of the Dave Sexton era. 4 years in charge. I don't know, when we've been covering this era, Paddy, if there's ever been a moment where we've thought, okay, it was going in the right direction. There were moments, even Wilf McGuinness, who said, if not for the rub of the luck going the wrong way. Even Frank O'Farrell, we've said that started really well, and if he had just made the decisions at a different time. Docky, of course, we didn't need to do that because he turned it around in the end. But there's never, ever been a point of the Dave Sexton era where you felt he's made that decision's the right, not even about it being the right decision over a single player, but even when that player came in, it wasn't like they're coming in and they're building moving forward, it's never felt that United were taking a step forward at any time. And I don't want to be disrespectful to Sexton because he's obviously a great coach. It was just so ill-fitting. And perhaps that was simply because Doherty was so attacking that anything that was seen as that anything would have been seen as pragmatic by comparison.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I suppose the one moment when you thought, yeah, he gets Old Trafford had been about 18 months earlier when he signed Ray Wilkins for a club record fee. But we've gone through the season without mentioning Ray Wilkins. I don't know if he was injured, but I think he only played about 6 games.
Yeah, he had an injury. He plays 13 league games.
13,
so,
right. But
so,
I mean, I suppose you've got to weigh that the player that he thought he could build the team round or build the midfield round, just wasn't there, when he was needed. But Niki Jovanovic figured as well, didn't he?
he made 24 appearances in all competitions, but it wasn't a great number considering they'd invested so heavily in him, and he'd only made a couple of appearances in the previous season.
Yeah,
I guess when you look at it, the fact that BIRTLES have played so many times without scoring, these were looking like big money sort of backfires, really. Especially with Mickey Thomas not really registering eye on the goals. Everything, not saying everything that he did turned out to be wrong. Obviously, the Jordan signing and McQueen was still really popular, and I think McQueen was the one who scored at Anfield, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, he was. So there was some popularity in there, but I think when you analysed all of the areas that made the changes, you couldn't say that's a definite step forward. Perhaps save for Wilkins, who, like I said, for one reason or another, he wasn't able to count on him as much. But I still think if you look at this season overall, would Wilkins have made the difference?
No.
To push United forward, and it's very difficult to make that argument.
No, that's true.
It is a strange one, the Sexton era, because some people will go on record as saying, like there are managers in the future whose football was worse than Dave Sexton's. You have been around to sort of see all of the ones. I mean, I guess principally people would compare it to Louis van Gaal. They would compare it to Jose Mourinho.
Yes.
Where would you put Sexton's in that mix?
Yeah, exactly where you've put him. I think the football, the sort of chessboard football that was associated with the Van Gaal era, certainly. I suppose David Moyes as well. I mean, David didn't get enough time, but nor did he get the right backup, nor did he have a proper transfer window, nor did so the odds were stacked against him. But yes, I would say that the football of Dave's era would remind me more of Louis van Gaal than any other United manager. And perhaps Mourinho in the bad times, which predominated, I'm afraid, would be another example. It's basically football without the flair, without the invention, without the joy.
Yeah,
I would say that the joy is the word that I would say that was missing more than anything else.
It's difficult for me because I'll come on to my personal trivia, which is interesting only to me in the context of this podcast. But
you must share it with us, though.
I will. Oh, it's a great line. But so I didn't see the Sexton era live. I watched a lot of games back. I think the way that I would describe it, if we're going to use the comparison to Sexton and Mourinho, which I think is fair. To Van Gaal and Mourinho, I think it's fair for modern audiences because it's easy for them to sort of compare in that way. Is that it was a removal of instinct. There was an instruction in there to take the instincts out of the game, take a touch, think about what you're doing. Whereas the other managers, Doherty for certain, Atkinson to an extent, definitely Ferguson, they like the gamble. Busby loved the gamble. Like take instinct, play on the edge. Do things the way that you want to do it, thrill the crowds. And those three managers, In fact, there's a quote by Martin Edwards, which I think sort of summarises it. He says, "Over history, it's funny." This was spoken to me, by the way. It wasn't a contemporary quote. It was spoken to me for the book Case Sarah, in which I was covering the Sexton era. He said, "Over history, it's funny, but some managers have understood the United tradition and way, and they've embraced it. Some haven't, and they haven't been able to deliver the style or the success in the same way." It does make it curious, Paddy, that then of 6 directors at the club, Busby was the one who opposed the sacking. But we should give a little line on Busby as well. Earlier, at the start of the season, he'd suffered a stroke, hadn't he? So he was recovering. He was back doing his duties on the board, and by all accounts, he was the one who said we should keep faith in Sexton.
Yeah, well, we've mentioned before that Matt had become softer is sort of a rather more pejorative word than I'd like to use, but sort of kinder. That's too nice a word, but basically less ruthless than he had been in his initial career. I mean, as a director, he kept his hand in, but yes, his decisions were his view of the Sexton. He may well have seen things. Bear in mind that Dave Sexton was very much his kind of man. He would have, in common with pretty well everybody in football, he would have found it very, very hard to, wield a proverbial knife when Dave Sexton was the person involved. I think probably as a football man, he would have felt that more deeply than, say, Martin or, business colleagues, like Mike Edelson and so on. So I think it would have been, I think it was just Matt getting old and nice and being unable to sort of give the thumbs down to a man he would have respected highly, a man whose devoutness as a Christian, as a Roman Catholic, he would have empathized with. And also he probably knew it was going to be 5-1 in the boardroom.
I was going to say, it might be a bit easier to say nay if the others have said yay.
Yeah, I think Dave would have seen that more as a consolation goal than anything else.
And he would have probably taken it in a very sporting way as well. So Dave Sexton era over at Manchester United. Obviously we'll be covering who follows him, but I am going to follow up with my trivia in a little while after we've done the squad.
Yeah, good.
So let's do the squad statistics. I'll pop up the first player first, Mike Duxbury, but I'll go through the goalkeepers before I get to him. Gary Bailey, first choice, 47 appearances and 40 in the league. Paddy Roach makes a brief return to the limelight, 2 league appearances throughout the season. Arthur Alveston, ever present, 49 appearances and a single goal, 42 in the league, obviously.
Hey, that's worthy of a mention. That's Arthur sort of beginning to stamp his name as one of United's all-time Mr. Consistencies.
Yeah, as is the man on the screen, although he doesn't get anywhere near the praise he deserves.
Well, I'm glad we're going to dwell a little on MICK Duxbury, because here's a man. It's very local boy and all that. It's one of these players, archetypal. You're going to take him for granted type of player, especially as he wasn't spectacular in his style. But he became an England player fairly soon in his Man United career. I think I may be wrong, but I think it was within a couple of years of coming into the first team picture, or even less. So he was highly rated, MICK Duxbury, and also versatile. I mean, rightly you've put him down as a defender because he could play a little bit Gary Neville-ish. He could play right back or central defence, I think.
Yeah.
And he could also play midfield. He was a good midfield player, good ball carrier.
Yeah. That's owing mainly to his athleticism.
Yeah.
He was a renowned athlete in the local area, and that sort of made him coveted by all the big clubs. Everton were keen to sign him before he did make that move to United. Like I said, a defender, primarily holding midfielder at some parts of his career. Makes 37 appearances throughout this season, scoring 3 goals. One of those unsung heroes, like I said, United was so prolific at creating this kind of player. You know, we talked about Brian Greenough before, other players before, you know, Jim Ryan, all these kind of players who just came in and played a bunch of a bunch of games throughout the season as part of a squad and never really got the limelight. It was the start of a career that goes under the radar somewhat, but nobody. Everyone gets surprised when I mention this. Nobody would play more times for United in the 1980s than MICK DUXBURY. A really strong start to a really good career at United.
Funny enough, that's 2 players then in this team, you know, who, and I've never been able to understand why there are certain players you take for granted. Arthur Alveston is one, and MICK DUXBURY another, and yet their records as Manchester United players are, you know, up there with some of the best, you know.
Yeah, it's terrific. Both of them terrific appearance tallies, as was Martin Buchan. 32 appearances this season, 26 in the league, slowing down a little bit as he becomes a veteran. Jovanovic, we mentioned him earlier, 24 appearances, 4 goals, 19 appearances and 4 goals in the league. Not a great season for McQueen, suffering with some injuries. 2 goals in 13 appearances, 2 in 11 in the league. Perhaps somewhat accounting for United's struggles in defence this season. But Kevin Moran steps in, 34 appearances in all competitions, 32 in the league. Another of these unsung heroes, by the way, who we haven't mentioned. Really.
Yes, actually, Kevin's another one. I mean, did Kevin play all of his games at centre back? He would have done, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, throughout this season, well, pretty much all of them.
He could play number 4, couldn't he? But I suppose that Duxbury would have slotted in there. Yeah.
Well, I mean, one player who's definitely making the number 2 shirt is on, and another unsung hero, and we've really only mentioned him a couple of times on the pod, Jimmy Nicol. 36 appearances in the league this season, a single goal, 42 in all competitions, and 2 goals. One who sadly isn't going to be an unsung hero is Anthony Whelan, the second Tony Whelan to play for United. He makes just a single appearance this season for United. I do want to talk a little bit about him. Defender from Dublin, spotted by Billy Behan, and described his move to Old Trafford from Bohemians for £30,000 as a dream come true. I'm going to read his quotes out. I signed in August and I came on as a sub in a game in November, a week after my 21st birthday. It was all very quick and I loved it. I missed home all right, but when you're training with that caliber of player, the homesickness fades a bit. Sometimes even now you think, did that really happen? But it did, and it was great. And I felt that I did okay in the game as well. Of course, I was hoping at the time there would be a few more, but it wasn't to be. But that jumps out. To go on at Old Trafford in front of nearly 50,000, there are no words to describe that. One game.
How lovely! How lovely to hear that. You know, some of the Irish players, you know, in the quiet way. I'm thinking of Billy Whelan, you know, from the Busby Babes.
Yeah.
And you know, Carey and so on. You know, they had one thing in common: a becoming modesty.
Yeah, and they had all that vital kind of ethic that, I mean, the likes of Bob Bishop and Billy Behan sending these players over, their scouting was so vigilant, so thorough that, you know, if for a player to make one appearance at the product of all of that scouting tells you, I mean, they found Whiteside, you know, like I said, Liam Whelan, other player, Ashley Grimes, we'll mention him in a minute, who played at I mean, George Best, all of these players who, you know, played varying times for United, but they could either play hundreds of times or they could play one time for United, like Anthony Whelan, and they would still appreciate it. And at least for United, that in terms of character, at least in terms of dedication, Billy Behan's nose for a player was spot on.
Did you ever hear how close they were to getting Brady?
Well, they were. I mean, Martin Edwards had commented at the time, thinking, talks are progressing well, but then everything went dead, and everything went dead because
sorry, I meant when he was a kid. Was
Oh
there
no, I
ever
didn't hear that. No, just the summer of '80 when
the summer of when he'd confounded them in the cup final, he was such a Man United player. He was also an Arsenal player and a Juventus one for that matter. But he was definitely the kind of player that when you think if you'd had Wilkins and Brady in the same midfield,
grief, yeah.
Who knows?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, that was not to be. That was definitely United's loss. Liam Brady might consider it his own, but yeah, he was definitely well compensated in Italy for that, to make up for it. Another Irish lad, like I said, Ashley Grimes, makes 10 appearances this season, scores 2 goals, 8 appearances in the league, both of his goals in the league. Steve Coppell, always ever present, of course, 6 goals in 49 games, 6 in 42 in the league. Lou McCarry, 9 goals in 44 appearances. All of those goals are in 38 league games. Chris McGrath makes just 1 appearance in the league. Sammy McElroy, 6 goals in 37 games, 5 in 32 in the league. Tom Sloan, 3 substitute appearances, 2 of those are in the league. Ray Wilkins, we already mentioned him earlier, with 13 appearances in the league, 15 in all competitions. And Mickey Thomas, 3 goals in 37, or 2 goals in 30 in the league. Brings us on to the forwards. Jimmy Greenough, after coming back from his injury problems last season, to score against Liverpool in that crazy game with the offside. This time round, makes just 12 appearances, 9 of those in the league before he moves to Crewe. Andy Ritchie, just 6 appearances, 4 of those in league before he's sold to Brighton to raise the money to sign Gary Birtles, who we will come on to right now. Gary Birtles then signed from Forest for 1.25 million. 1 goal in 28 games this season. That goal comes in the FA Cup against Brighton, but no goals in the league in 25 league appearances. But if you take those numbers out, Paddy, no goals in 25. You take 25 off 64.
Yeah.
Then the numbers starts to become a little bit more respectable, doesn't it? When you've got a manager like Atkinson in there.
Yeah.
So he does perhaps. I don't want to. Again, it's a bit harsh to sort of criticise Sexton for Gary Birtles' inability to settle at the start. But it does speak to what you were saying earlier about the adventure of a manager as well.
Yeah. Yes, I think that's that's it. I mean, looking back on it, I think probably Joe being there may have cowed Birtles a little bit, in that he was looking for scraps, that the players would pick out Joe, and so he was definitely less of a focal point than he had been at Forest.
Yeah, I've got a great story about Gary as well. Another one.
Let's hear it.
So, well, I've got one. I've got the story. It's Sammy McElroy's story. So he was telling me a story about how Gary Birtles was struggling at the team hotel before one of the games. He was sharing a room with Gary.
Yeah.
And they were talking about him. He wasn't doing so well. What he was going through, how difficult it had been for him. So Sammy says to him, "Well, what did you used to do at Forest? Like, because Gary's saying it's a lot different in United, how you do things here." So he said, "Well, what did you do at Forest? Well, why don't we kind of imitate what you did there? Try and settle you in." And he said, "What would you do the night before a game?" And Gary goes, "Oh, well, probably just have like half a pint just to settle down." So Sammy goes, "Well, we'll order you one up then." And Gary goes, "No, don't be silly. Don't." No, Sammy goes, "No, I insist. We'll get you half a pint." Gets him one. And so this pint comes up to the room. Gary takes it down, has a nice drink. And Sammy goes, "How are you feeling?" He goes, "Yeah, all right. You're gonna sleep. Have a nice sleep." Next day, the game's played. Birtles doesn't score yet again. Sammy goes to him after. He goes, "Well, we effing tried, didn't we, Gary?" there are a few other. You were talking about jokes earlier on. There were a few that ran around about how long Gary Birtles didn't score, but you could probably
well, there was that awful one, that cruel one about Terry Waite, wasn't there?
that's what I'll lose. I'm not.
Sorry?
If you're on social media and you wanted people to sort of throw that joke at you, I'm pretty sure that they'll be pretty quick to do that. People of that generation.
Very sick.
But yeah.
Very sick.
So that brings us on to the last forward in this season, making his debut. Scott McGarvey, just 2 substitute appearances this season. Glasgow born, came through the academy, a bright prospect at centre forward. He played a decent amount of games as well throughout his career at United. I mean, decent for someone breaking through. Yeah. But he's perhaps better known more recently for being an agent in the game, and he was involved with Sam Allardyce in his brief ill-fated stint as England manager. Again, not to do with United, so I'll leave you to read that up yourself, but a very, very interesting story and a very, very colourful character, to say the least. You did tell me off last time about having the tactics. I've got them prepared this time, even though in my notes had McIlroy in midfield twice, which I'm sure he could have done a job twice
he covered
in midfield.
Every blade of grass. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But yeah, not in this team, unfortunately. Gary Bailey, as you can see, it's a 4-4-2. It's a flat 4-4-2 with Coppell and Thomas on the wings. Yeah. McIlroy and Macari. So Macari's moved back into midfield due to Birtles signing and Wilkins' injury as well. Obviously, it's not one there. But if you look at that team, Paddy, Bailey, Moran, really, it's off and off in terms of the players. There's not that many changes. You've got Nicol, Buchan, Albiston, Coppell, McIlroy, Macari. A good number left in from the 77 Cup final side. It's not like there's a massive transition. When I was looking at it, before I even put the graphic up, I was expecting there only to be about 3 in there, but it's the major performers in there. The more consistent ones, Albiston, Coppell, Nicol, they're all players, McIlroy, Macari, they're all the players that the Sexton inherited, which I guess sort of tells its own story.
Not a lot of height without Gordon McQueen, is it? Is there?
That's a small back line for sure.
I mean, that's a really small, of small Jimmy Nicol average, I suppose. Buchan average, Moran small for a centre half, Albiston small for a left back, Coppell, McIlroy average, I suppose. Macari small, Thomas small. Birtles not exactly an aerial monster. So Joe must have done quite a lot in defending set pieces, mustn't he?
Yeah. There's one story I never told as well about Dave Sexton. I think it was the back end of the previous season, or it may have even been I think it was the back end of the previous season. It might be in the season before that. There was a game against Coventry. United played at Old Trafford, and a woman raced from the south stand down to hit him with her handbag. This was a United fan, sort of in a protest against the poor football. I mention it only because it sort of speaks to the sort of, I guess, caricaturist way that English football was at the time, that you could go up and do something like that. You couldn't imagine someone doing it up to Jose Mourinho, can you? Like throwing their handbag at him or something.
No, definitely not. Well, they wouldn't have a handbag, would they? I mean,
confiscated it. Yeah, good point.
I mean,
I suppose mega snow bag with the programming or something.
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't have been. You see, nowadays that's just taking all the fun out of the game. You'd have had to leave it at a bag collection point, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Banning handbags has taken all the fun out of the game.
Yeah. Well, consider this podcast the official campaign starter to reduce handbags.
I mean, we are open to sponsorship from Louis Vuitton or Mulberry. Yeah,
absolutely. Make Christmas a lot less expensive if you do that. Okay, let's get on to the colours this season. Graphic this season.
That's a good point, Wayne. I'll be looking for a handbag from you next year. Yeah, right. Okay. Sorry, let's go on. Let's go to look at the colours. I like the middle one.
Yeah, although they did occasionally, more occasionally than it shows on the graphic here, they would play with black shorts and black socks on the away kit. So
Yeah.
if you're not watching the video, it's white, red, and red, white, and black. The home kit. They're manufactured by Adidas now. It's a new strip, so they've moved away from Admiral. So they got the stripes on the arm. On the away kit, it's a nice plain white, but the stripes are under the arm, down the sides of the body, down the shorts. It looks all white on the video, but it was white, black, and black mostly. And then the third kit was blue, white, and black, which was becoming
I'm not sure if I like Man United to be wearing what I regard as an Everton strip, but there we go.
Yeah, it sits better if it's all blue. The Royal sort of looked the 68 final, but yeah, it does. There is a bit Everton about that, for sure. Play the league positions more traditionally Everton. Sorry, it doesn't really matter. The Everton fans won't be, but they won't be coming at me for it. But the average attendance at Old Trafford down by 7,000 overall, 44,099. Top scorer was Joe Jordan with 15 goals, all of them in the league. The key result was the one I've got. Key result. What constitutes a key result in a season where United finish 8th, nowhere near doing anything in the cups as well? Well, I've gone with the 1-0 late in the season at Anfield, where where Gordon McQueen scores. Obviously, there's that, but not much else to write home about apart from this compelling statistic. The United review. Let's put that up as well. As you can see, a little bit of a different design this time around. But it's very much of its time again. But you can see the crest up there now. United review. There, it's big circular main graphic at as the main image on the page, and then the club crest at the top with United review on the left for the princely sum of 20 pence. This is my statistic. Everyone, when you look back and you say, "Oh, who was the such and such when you were born?" or something like, "Who was the Manchester United manager when you were born?" The Manchester United manager when I was born, in the weeks after Dave Sexton was sacked, was Jack Crompton, because he was standing the caretaker boss, and obviously they wouldn't.
Oh, listen, you've made us wait, but what a beautiful piece of trivia that is. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, my equivalent was Matt Busby.
Yeah.
Yep.
Fantastic. Well,
Matt Busby, who when I was born was preparing to get his team ready for the FA Cup that they were to win in 1948.
Yeah. In which Jack Crompton, by the way, when we covered on the channel, shouldn't have even played in that final.
Because he had boils on his back.
But he was sufficiently fit to lead United on their post-season trip, which we will cover in the next episode, but it caused a lot of controversy, which the incoming manager, whoever he may be, will have to deal with for sure. But they went on a post-season trip of different areas, and it caused a lot of issues within the squad. But Jack Crompton, he was named caretaker manager for a moment of time. And we should mention as well, a very, very small anecdotal moment. Harry Gregg had been brought back to the club as a caretaker man, as a coach, a goalkeeper coach, the first specialist goalkeeping coach at United, to work with Gary Bailey. And there'd even been promotional pictures about this. They'd shown the pictures. They had pictures together and everything. But afterwards, Harry Gregg, as he would, became very disgruntled with the idea that he was only a goalkeeping coach, and he would insist, "No, I'm just a coach. I'm just a coach," join in with the rest of it. He felt that I don't know if he ever put a formal application in, but he really felt disappointed that he wasn't considered for the job after Sexton was sacked, because he'd made it known that he was interested.
I think, had he not started in management at Shrewsbury?
Yeah, and I'd in fact recommended Jim Holton to Tommy Docherty. So he'd always felt, obviously, that affinity with United. So when he came back, I think he felt that, not that he was obliged to get the job, but that he was at least worth an interview. And I think he was, felt let down about that. But he wasn't even considered. He wasn't even named upon amongst the list of people who would be seriously considered in the coming weeks for that job. And United, apparently, they had one man who was going to be their favourite who wouldn't get the job. But no more spoilers. We'll leave that till the next episode. Elsewhere in football this season, because it was another of those great seasons for English football, if not for Manchester United. Aston Villa win the league title. Spurs win the FA Cup in the famous final with Ricky Villa. League Cup goes to Liverpool. European Cup goes to Liverpool as well, even better. UEFA Cup goes to Ipswich Town, so their great side from last season, as we were talking about, really has kicked on. I mean, it's where if you're going to lose 6-0 to Ipswich and they're going to qualify for Europe, they might as well go and win the bloody thing the season.
They showed a bit of respect there, I thought.
Yeah, as they did with missing all those penalties as well to keep the score down. Notts County promoted to the First Division after 55 years, and Swansea will be back in as well for the first time ever. They're promoted to the First Division, so we'll be talking about them next time as well. If you've enjoyed the podcast, please give us a nice rating or review on the audio platform you're listening on, and if you're watching back on the video podcast, please be sure to like and subscribe and join in the conversation in the comment section. We will be back shortly to cover that 81-82 season, where we will speculate and then confirm who Dave Sexton's successor as Manchester United